Good to have you back with us here on our special programming here on RT American Worldwide. Coming to you from London tonight. We're reviewing Brexit, looking forward. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity to travel to Edinburgh, Scotland, for the UK snap parliamentary election. There I talked to some concerned residents who voted in that election. Many of them shared their thoughts on the results of the election. Take a listen.
I think UK-wide, again, the Tories got a kicking. I don't think the Prime Minister she's failed basically pretty miserably in the election.
You think she'll hold on to her seat as Prime Minister?
I don't think she'll stay for very long. I think her authority in the Tory party is gone. When she called the election 6 weeks ago, she made such a big thing about a mandate and wanting to win more seats and win her own mandate, and she's totally failed. So
I think it's interesting to have a hung parliament now.
What do you think the future is?
I honestly don't know. I doubt that they will form a coalition government. So I guess I'll just have to wait and see what Theresa May decides to do.
Thoughts on the election real quick. What do you think of the outcome?
Scary.
Scary?
Yeah, it is a bit.
How so?
Because there's a lot going on, and there's no real government. You know, I think that's the problem. Yeah.
The UK election. What did you think?
Disappointed.
Just disappointed?
Well, it was unfortunate.
What's the future?
Well, I don't know what she said to the Queen. If she is forming a government.
Do you think she can?
Yes, well, it would be better. Yes, I think she can.
You want Theresa May to succeed?
Yes.
What do you think of Theresa May? How did she do?
Not particularly well. I don't think she did particularly well. She held the election to try and get a majority. She didn't get the majority, and now she's looking pretty weak and wobbly by the looks of things.
What does this do for Scottish independence, you think?
I think it's set it back a little. I mean, the SNP still won a majority of seats. I personally think we need to wait and see what happens with Brexit before we make a decision on whether we leave Scotland, leave the UK anyway. But I think it's set it back a little.
What does it do for independence?
I think they've got to shelve that for a while.
Shelve it?
Yeah. I mean, I support it, but, you know, a lot of people, the vote changed. The SNP can't claim to have so many votes now, so they just don't.
Tommy Sheridan, former member of the Scottish Parliament, is here with us tonight in London. Tommy, thanks for being here. Let's talk Brexit. Where are the Scottish people on this issue?
It's quite a confused picture, actually, Ed, because the Scottish people quite overwhelmingly voted to remain. 62% said that they wanted to stay part of the European Union. And that followed quite hotly on the heels of our own independence referendum, where 55% said they wanted to stay part of the UK, 45% said they wanted to leave the UK. What we've got now, however, is a dog's breakfast. It is a complete and utter mess. You have a Prime Minister who is, quite frankly, the zombie Prime Minister. She is the Walking Dead. Everyone, even her own allies, recognise that she'll be lucky to see out the end of this year, never mind take us into an election.
She hasn't recovered politically at all since the election just a few weeks ago?
Well, Ed, think about it for a moment. She has a catastrophe of an election. Her advisers have to go because they badly advised her. Her character that they wanted to build the election round, that was quite a bit of a problem, because she had no character, she had no charisma, she wasn't able to communicate with ordinary people. She made an absolute shambles of the election. Then we have the disaster, the horrible disaster in Grenfell. And instead of being a statesman-like individual and getting down there as quickly as possible and showing empathy for people that have lost their lives and lost their homes, she goes and visits the emergency service workers and hides herself from the victims of the fire, only then to try and get that back on track by going back another day once she's been called out for that stupidity. She is an absolute walking disaster.
So do the Scottish people have confidence that she can negotiate a good Brexit deal? That's a rather leading question, but I mean, the fact is that she's got political trouble and Scotland was never her best friend anyway.
Well, let's take today, for goodness sakes. She announces at breakfast that she's offering a serious offer in terms of citizenship for Britain. And she offers this at a dinner. I mean, the negotiations haven't started yet, and she throws this thing into a dinner, and all of the European leaders are saying, hey, wait a minute, we're sitting down for a dinner. We're not negotiating. What are you talking about? And then they come out by tea time and they say, no, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. That's less than what we offered 2 weeks ago. She is a mess, Ed, and everybody knows that she's a mess.
Tommy, I wish you were opinionated. I wish you had strong feelings. It's so terrible when we have a guest like this, wishy-washy. And
Larry, you've got to say what you mean and mean what you say. That's what it's all about. That's what life's about.
So what does Scotland do in this betwixt and between? As you said it, Scotland is neither here nor there. Wanted to stay in the Union, didn't want to separate from Britain. Where are you?
It's an interesting dynamic now, Larry. We're a small country. We've got big hearts. We're a politicised nation. Even though we're only 5 million, we had a fantastic turnout at a referendum. Over 80%, unheard of across the Western world.
Turnout
over 80%
in Scotland.
Particularly the young people, Larry, were energised, politicised. They were turning into the social media. They were turning off the mainstream media, which was totally and utterly biased against independence. But we still managed. We started off the campaign, I've got to tell you, around 29% support for independence. By the end of the campaign, we had 45% support for independence. So those who say that independence is off the agenda, I think they speak too soon. The rumours of independence death have been greatly exaggerated, to paraphrase one of your greatest writers in America.
Even now, after the snap elections, you still believe that an independence vote is in the works?
Ed, you and I had the pleasure of meeting you when you were up in Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago, and you and I have discussed this. What you have to remember is the SNP, before 2015, only 2 years ago, the largest number of members of Parliament they ever elected was 6. 6. In 2015, they elected 56. Now that was a watermark, a watershed, an historic election. What happened a couple of weeks ago? They elected 35. It was the second best result in their history. And everybody's saying, oh, it's terrible for the SNP. Come on, get a grip. Look at the wider picture. Look at the bigger picture. They won the election in Scotland.
So you don't think the Scottish National Party is in as big a dire straits as people are making it out to be? I mean, clearly Nicola Sturgeon had a rough night at the office.
Well, you know, that depends on who you talk to. That depends on what media you're watching. Nicola herself has to watch who she's taking advice from here. She had a fantastic result if it was compared to all of the other results apart from the watershed of 2015. The SNP, by a clear majority, won in Scotland. That's a fact that you just simply can't get away from. Now, if you watch the BBC, you would think the SNP had lost. They won the election.
So where is Scotland on Brexit right now? I mean, you pointed out something very profound, that Theresa May is somewhat disfocused to bring up the possibility of immigration exchanges and security for people who are already here versus the European Union at a dinner. She was criticized for taking the forum to do that. But how is Scotland going to go along with this Brexit negotiation? I mean, there's no getting out of it now.
Well, you see,
unless you vote independent.
Well, this is the point. You've read my thoughts, Ed. You've read my thoughts, because the point is, from a cynical point of view, the more Theresa May gets her way, the more she makes a mess, the more Brexit becomes an absolute disaster, then the more the Scottish people will think, wait a minute, we've actually got more friends in Europe than England's got. May has made a mess of it. Why don't we go down the road of independence and try and get access to the single market? Try and do a Norway. Try and get an access to a free trade agreement. Norway is one of the most thriving, happiest countries in the world. They happen to be smaller than Scotland. They happen to have the same resource we've got. Oil. Only difference is they own their oil. I want Scotland to own our oil instead of the Texan billionaires who currently own it. So from my point of view, we have got lots to be happy and hopeful about. Mrs May is a disaster. Mr Corbyn, hope on the horizon. hope on the horizon. He adds it's like a lovely dinner you're making and you want to add some spice here. And Mr Corbyn is the spice as far as Scottish politics is concerned.
What about Davis, the Brexit negotiator?
What about him? You know, even in his own household, people are asking, who is he? Come on. You know, across the whole of Britain, who's Mr Davis?
Well, he's the guy doing the deal right now. He's the chief negotiator for Brexit.
But he's not making his mark on the people.
But the Conservatives may settle on him.
Poison chalice said.
Okay.
Poison chalice here.
What are you making
the next leader of the Tory party is going to get beat. So who wants to be the next leader of the Tory party?
I've got to ask you, I'm very intrigued by something you pointed out. The 85% and the people turning off the mainstream media and turning on the social media, the young people, energized. It's great news for any nation to hear that the young people are energized. Was that surprising to you? Was it heartening to see that happen? What was the impetus for that, to literally turn off the news that so many generations have depended on, go into social media and really get that energy going? It's amazing to me.
Lindsay, I was involved intimately in the referendum campaign. I was involved in a Hope Over Fear campaign.
Right.
I've got to say, I wish we copyrighted it, because everybody seems to use the phrase now, but we used it first in Scotland with the independence campaign. I do have to apologise.
Sounds like Obama took a page out of their playbook.
Actually, we stole it from Nelson Mandela. But anyway, you know,
hey, whatever works. Hey.
it's been stolen since.
Somebody steal from somebody big.
Most of, as you know, Larry, most plagiarism has been plagiarised. So from the point of view of the independence campaign, that energised a nation to think, hey, wait a wee minute, we are big enough, we are strong enough, we are smart enough, we are economically stable enough to stand on our own 2 feet. I mean, what is it we want here? We want to be a nation. Now, there is no nation in the planet that has ever got independence from British imperialism who's then said, I'm sorry, going to take us back. No one. No one's done that. We wanted to have the same rights as any other small country in the world. We're no better than anybody, Lindsay. We're no better. But hey, we're no worse either. And I think what we did is we used the social media to mobilise a lot of young people who hitherto had not been interested or engaged in politics. They are now engaged. And the interesting thing is we had quite a significant drop in turnout at the general election in Scotland. Whereas across England and Wales there was actually a higher turnout. In Scotland there was a lower turnout. The SNP actually lost nearly 500,000 votes. Nearly 500,000 votes. But here's the interesting thing. Labour in Scotland, because you would think, with them doing so well in England and Wales, Labour in Scotland put on less than 10,000 votes. Less than 10,000 votes between last year and this 2015 and this year. Mm-hmm. So that shows you that the Labour Party in Scotland is still stuck in this Blairite bubble, because they all voted against Corbyn. They all campaigned against Corbyn. Mm-hmm. In England, the Labour vote went up 10%. In Scotland, the Labour vote went up 1%. And that's because the Labour Party in Scotland was too busy attacking independence and attacking the SNP that they forgot to attack the Tories and austerity.
What happened to Labour in Scotland? And one of the things why they had the Brexit vote is because of immigration that dealt with Labour. There was a lot of European Union workers that were coming over here taking jobs. And it was depressing wages. That was part of it. But that kind of flies in the face of the Scottish tradition and the Scottish view of immigration. They don't mix, do they? I mean, the Scottish view of immigration is far different than that of Britain.
Before I come on to the camera here, I was having a lovely chat with Anne off camera, and Anne was talking about Kilmarnock. And Kilmarnock in Scotland is the birthplace of one of our most famous authors, a chap called William McIlvanney, who wrote The Big Man and wrote The Killing. The Big Man was a film that Liam Neeson starred in. And William McIlvanney once described Scotland as a mongrel nation, a mongrel. So when we have no pedigree, there's nothing pure about Scotland. We are made up of immigrants, whether they be Italian, whether they be Irish, whether they be Polish. So our attitude to immigration is much more about, hey, do you want to come and live and work and build your life in Scotland? Brilliant, because we accept and we understand that immigrants put more into the economy than they take out of the economy. That's just a fact.
Sure.
I just
Americans
find
should
that
know that,
fascinating. And of course, Scotland was against Brexit. They have a different view of immigration.
Absolutely.
And so there are real differences between Scotland and England.
But don't get me wrong, Ed. You see, I mean, I'm a socialist. I have a particular view on Brexit. There is a progressive and quite a consistent left-wing opposition to Brexit that isn't about immigration, but it's about the European Union as a body. It's a non-democratic body. We all want, when we vote for a political party at an election, we want that political party, if it wins, to be able to carry out its programme, because that's what democracy is about. But in the European Union, because of the regulations, because of the rules, the Labour manifesto, for instance, on public ownership, they won't be able to carry it out if you were in the European Union, because it would be anti-competitive to take the water back, anti-competitive to take the railways back. So there's a bit of a dilemma here, that a positive, progressive political programme couldn't be implemented based on the European Union rules. There's a reason, a positive reason, for questioning the European Union.
So we have the perfect question for you, which I've been asking everybody else. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Oh, Larry, I said earlier I'm a socialist. Socialists are born optimistic. Always. The glass is half full.
All right.
Always half full, never
Tony
half
Sheridan,
empty.
former Scottish MP, great to have you with us tonight. You know, this historical event has given comedians a lot to chew on, a lot of material. And while it's no laughing matter, we can certainly appreciate some comic relief in all of this. Lee Camp, RT America's Redacted Tonight host, joins us from Washington, D.C. Lee, good to see you with us tonight. Good to have you with us. Your thoughts
good to
on
see you,
all this
Ed.
political craziness?
Well, first of all, I want to say I could listen to Tommy Sheridan say "Mucklevanny" all day. All day I could. So about Brexit, as you may know, I am an expert on Brexit. I have studied it for the past 15, 16 minutes of my life. And I want to say this. When I first heard about Brexit, honestly, my initial response as an American was, they got to vote on this? They got to vote on... Why did they get to vote on this? I want to vote on I want to vote on all kinds of things. I want to be able to vote on fracking or GMOs or chemicals in our food or our water or whether Donald Trump should be forced to wear a Silence of the Lambs muzzle wherever he goes so his toxic spittle doesn't land on babies. We should have votes on all kinds of issues, Ed. I'm upset that they got to vote on this.
Well, they sure did. They got to vote on it. In fact, they might even vote again. They are the country of elections. Your thoughts on that?
Well, they are, and I'll tell you, Ed, they do something that's, you know, very technologically advanced when they vote, with the snap election, with Brexit, everything. They vote on these high-tech devices that are accountable and verifiable, and you can actually see the vote and double-check it. And these devices are called, let me check, I have it here, pen and paper. They write it down with a pen and paper, and then they have a verifiable vote that they can look at. We vote on computers that have proprietary code that no one's allowed to look at. You can never see, you can never check most of the time, and we really have no idea what's going on inside of them. Whereas they have a pen and paper, they can look at it, they can say, here's how people voted, and actually find out whether it's legitimate. Ours it's amazing we're okay with this system, considering if it were the last 10 minutes of the Super Bowl and they turned off all the cameras and performed the game in the dark and then told everybody what the result was, this country would be on fire. We would be pissed off. But because it's just every election, we're fine with it.
All right, now, you have to have some type of commentary on the hairstyles of the President Trump and Boris Johnson, who's the foreign minister here. If there's the number one thing that's in common between these two countries, we'll have leaders that must have the same hairdresser.
Well, they're similar hairdressers, but Donald Trump clearly has thousands of dollars of interesting and unique product in that hairstyle to keep it like a helmet. Whereas Boris Johnson, I don't think, he's not a billionaire. He can't afford a comb, so you'll notice his is all over the place. So, you know, I think Trump should donate some combs over to Boris Johnson. It might really help him out there in the future.
All right, Lee Camp, Redacted host. Always great to have you with us. Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed.
The comic relief can be found with Lee Camp. Coming up on our Brexit one-year anniversary special, Prime Minister Theresa May's snap election decision cost her and her party big time. Can she see recovery? We'll tell you right after this break. Stay with us.
If you want to know what's going on in your city and your streets, never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. If you speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl. Between the outrage and the evidence, what's going on in this world. So open up your eyes and open up them doors. When you open up your mind, you start to question mode. I am watching the heart.
I think the average viewer, just after watching a couple of segments, understands that we're telling stories that our critics can't tell. And you know why? Because their advertisers won't let them. In order to create change, you have to be honest. You have to tell the truth. RT's able to do that. Every story is built on going after the backstory to what's really happening out there to the American public. What's happening when a corporation makes a pharmaceutical that kills people? When a company in the environmental business ends up polluting a river that causes cancer and other illnesses, they put all the health risk, all the dangers out to the American public. Those are stories that we tell every week, and you know what? They're working.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows. And Q Larry. Question more.
Welcome back to our coverage here from London. I'm Ed Schultz along with Larry King and Lindsay France. Our first-year anniversary of Brexit, primetime coverage worldwide here on RT. Prime Minister Theresa May gambled and lost her parliamentary majority over the Brexit issue. RT's Polly Boyko takes us through the twists and turns of Britain's rocky road to breakup.
It was a vote that changed the course of history. The 48% who'd voted to stay were outraged, although the others, they were delighted.
The sun has risen on an independent United Kingdom. June the 23rd needs to become a national bank holiday, and we will call it Independence Day.
Nigel Farage may have been jumping the gun there. His so-called Independence Day is still a distant prospect. The referendum result killed the political career of David Cameron and allowed Home Secretary Theresa May to step up to the plate. In the run-up to the vote, she had been a quiet Remainer, but the desire to lead post-Brexit Britain forced her to reconsider her position.
Brexit means Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
A year down the line, that sounds like something from an alternate universe, considering that Theresa May called an election in order to strengthen her hand in the Brexit talks, but ended up free-falling in the polls and losing her parliamentary majority. Her atrocious result meant that politically, her weakened government limped into negotiations with Brussels earlier this week. And bear in mind, these talks were never going to be a walk in the park.
Some have created the illusion that negotiations can be concluded quickly and painlessly.
Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians.
The Commission was trying to bully the British people.
Arguments over whether the UK would pay the EU's $100 billion Brexit bill, guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens in the UK, and who would get custody of Gibraltar, were all thorny issues. But those rows took a back seat when Britain was hit by a wave of terror. 4 terror attacks in the space of just 3 months, to be precise. And many Britons held Theresa May directly responsible because she'd been head of the Home Office for 6 years before becoming Prime Minister. And with all the security and political chaos, few people even noticed that earlier this week, Brexit negotiations officially kicked off, but not in the way that London would have hoped. The British government's already been accused of caving into Brussels over the Brexit schedule. And opinion polls now show that if the country got to vote again, it would reject leaving the EU. So, just like Theresa May, the plan for Brexit went from strong and stable to weak and wobbly within the space of just 1 year.
And our panel discussion continues tonight. Tommy Sheridan, former member of the Scottish Parliament, is with us. Also, British politician, radio talk show host, and TV host of Sputnik, George Galloway, joins us as well. Larry?
George, what do you make of all this? I assume you've watched a lot of this, you've analyzed this. What do you make of the whole Brexit Britain story?
Well, I spent almost 30 years sitting in that parliament over the river there. And so nothing that happens there surprises me. But the shock of the Tories calling an election, against their own law, by the way, which they had introduced, making it fixed-term parliaments, calling an election, demanding a new mandate, a stronger hand, and then losing the majority that they had, is one of the biggest political upsets of my life.
And why do you think she did?
She imagined that the Labour leader was as unpopular in the country as he was in the chanceries and in the newspaper editorial offices. But people like Tommy and me knew, because we've known him for decades, that Jeremy Corbyn on the stump as a campaigner would electrify the country. And that's exactly what he did. He increased the Labour vote by more votes than anyone since 1945, the transformative post-war Labour government. 3.5 million votes he put on. And if the campaign had gone on even a few more days, he'd have done even better than that and might have won an actual majority, because there are dozens of Tory MPs now sitting on wafer-thin majorities, including the Minister of the Interior, the Home Secretary as we call them, who after 3 recounts is in Parliament with a couple of hundred votes.
Do you think he's the next Prime Minister?
Well, it's not as easy as that, because they will get rid of Theresa May, but getting a new election is a different proposition. They've lashed together an alliance, a kind of coalition, though they haven't yet signed it. The Tories are being asked to pave the streets of East Belfast in Northern Ireland in gold as a price of the Democratic Unionist Party agreeing to support the Tories in government.
So if it's not Corbyn, you're thinking David Davis would be, because he could avert an election until later?
To me, it's a no-brainer. The only alternative is Boris Johnson, who would be a catastrophe.
And you disagree with that, Tommy?
Well, I don't disagree that David Davis is probably one of the most competent Tories that's around just now. But I think George would agree with me that momentum is a big thing in politics, and momentum is now with Corbyn and Labour. And if Davis was to take over, you've got to remember, May's authority was undermined because she was never elected by the country. She then called an election and lost her majority, as George said. If Davis takes over, what authority does he have? He's unelected.
What about that?
It's a very strong point, except for this. He would say, I'm the chief negotiator of Brexit. You're going to need to let me carry on with my negotiations, then I'll give you a general election at the end.
This Irish party that is now
the
part
DUP.
of... What are they?
They're extreme,
they form the coalition.
Extreme loyalists. The kind of people who went to your country and became the hillbillies. That's the origin of the term, hillbillies. They were extreme loyalists who, by loyalist I mean the union of Ireland with Britain, extreme Protestants for your viewers, who went to the hills in the United States. Billy is after King Billy, who's their standard bearer from a quite recent battle.
Do you know that? Mm-hmm.
Quite recent battle in 1690. That's where the term hillbillies comes from, yeah. They were the Billy boys who went to live in the hills. They were the original rednecks, because it was with rednecks that Britain, Scotland, populated Ireland as settlers to disrupt the growing national consciousness of the Irish people. They were sent there literally as settlers.
How extreme is that party?
Well, in the next 2 weeks you'll see how extreme. 3,000 pallets, wooden pallets, were stolen today in Belfast to build bonfires. And on those bonfires will be figures of everyone from the Pope to the Irish nationalist leader, Gerry Adams. Maybe I'll get a dummy this year. I did one year. Anyone that they hate, anyone from a Roman Catholic background like me, could end up on that bonfire. They are linked to Protestant paramilitary killers, murderers, people who attacked people for no other reason than that they were Catholics and murdered them.
Other than that, nice guys.
They're actually the oddest group of people you could possibly imagine.
Are there any Scots in that group?
No, there's no Scots in that group, Larry, but the point you have to try and bear in mind here is the election campaign and the way the media portrayed it was, how could you possibly vote for this guy Corbyn, who's got links with extremists? You know, the fact that Jeremy, over many years, has met with politicians from Northern Ireland and tried to build peace, tried to bring people in to the process, met with Sinn Féin when no one else would speak to Sinn Féin, recognised that the nationalist community was being ignored and were being discriminated against. He's always tried to build peace, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ireland. He was supposed to be the guy who had links with extremists. Now what we have is May's forming a government with extremists.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an absolute disgrace. And it has got no legitimacy.
They wear orange sashes at this time of year, and they go on parades, provocative parades through Roman Catholic areas. I mean, they're a kind of Ku Klux Klan, a milder form, maybe, of the Ku Klux Klan. Wow. And Theresa May is now clinging to power by the tassels of an orange sash.
You said we're going to see in the next few weeks. What are we going to see?
Well, this is the marching season. Because they commemorate, they commemorate a battle which took place, I'm not making this up, in 1690. And they parade at this time of the year to demonstrate their ethno-religious superiority over the Irish Catholic majority. Because, of course, in the island of Ireland as a whole, the Roman Catholics are a huge majority. So they carved out a little statelet called Northern Ireland, they call it Northern Ireland, and gerrymandered the boundaries so that they thought there would always be a Protestant majority in this little statelet. Actually, that majority is fast disappearing for a variety of reasons.
Do they have a charismatic leader?
They did. The DUP was led by the Reverend Ian Paisley, who used to boom and terrify.
Right?
Well, actually, on a personal level, he was quite a decent and honest Christian. But he used sectarianism and sectarian hatred to build a movement which became the Democratic Unionist Party, which is now in power in Britain. Can you believe it? Theresa May would fall from power without their 10 votes. That's how close the election was.
And that's a political dynamic that hasn't been played out on this continent in a long time. Yeah. So where do you see Brexit going in the next year? These negotiations, from the standpoint that, you know, she's on political shaky ground. You really don't know who the next prime minister is. You don't know how long Jeremy Corbyn's political momentum is going to keep going. Where is Brexit? How can you be in a position of strength in negotiation after all this?
We've lost any position of strength that we might have had. She could have gone into these negotiations with a relatively small but doable majority of 12. She then called an election to get a bigger majority and lost the majority that she already had. So the European Union governments, mainly right-wing governments, the European Union Commission, which is a neoliberal bastion, they know they've got her at their mercy. So they're not going to do any kind of deal.
Do you think that the public has figured that out, and that's why half the people in the UK right now are not sure about Brexit? That's the latest polling.
Well, I didn't see that poll, but what I do know is that in addition to, and I was a Brexit campaigner, I mean, I'm so old that I knew Tommy when he had the diametrically opposite view of the European Union, the single market, and of Scottish independence, because we were comrades on the British left. But I am convinced that the majority of British people believe that Brexit has been voted for democratically, and it's best that we get on with it.
What do you think?
But what we've got is a government now incapable of getting on with it.
What I said earlier, Ed, is there is a very progressive argument for Brexit. That's the argument I promoted. I voted Brexit because I believe the European Union is an undemocratic institution. And there's a fine left tradition from Tony Benn, Bob Crow, the trade union movement. I campaigned along the trade union left against the European Union because, in my opinion, it's an undemocratic, bloated bureaucracy.
A super state.
It's a super state. It's a super state that has got power that it doesn't deserve. It hasn't earned the power, Lindsay. However, the way the media played the campaign, they made it all about immigration. They portrayed it as if it was a xenophobic vote. Well, I've got to say to you, that means then that the people of Scotland must be somehow or other very, very less xenophobic than the majority of people in England. And I don't believe that. I believe there are some people in Scotland that are maybe more centre-left than in England. But I think what you had was lies and damned lies that were told during that campaign. The £350 million a week, for instance, that was emblazoned in the bus that Boris doesn't want to talk about any longer. Where is it? Where is it after Brexit? So from my point of view, the thing is still in a mess. It's in a flux. But I agree with George. George and I, we are socialists. If Britain, and we hope, votes for socialism, the last thing we would ever want is people saying, oh, but wait a minute, we want another vote. The democratic will is a democratic will. So it has to be carried out. But it has to be carried out on the basis of a people's Brexit, where jobs and security become priorities. We should be introducing conditions of employment that are better than the European Union.
Your thoughts on it, George?
Well, if Jeremy had won the election, which I'm sure both of us wished that he had, then we would have been able to build that kind of a Britain. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn's programme cannot be, as Tommy said earlier, implemented within the European Union. You can't nationalise, you can't intervene in the economy, you can't protect jobs and essential industries if you remain in the European Union. That's why I wanted out of it, because I want a Britain where we can do these things. And leaving the EU was a necessary but not sufficient condition to build that kind of society. And so my campaign for Brexit was not based on any of these tabloid traducing of immigrants and the rest, but a democratic case. There is no case for being governed by people that you didn't elect and cannot remove, and whose articles of association make impossible the politics that you've spent your life fighting for. And so it was no difficulty for me at all to join the Brexit campaign from the left. Now, this result springs out of the same swamp that Donald Trump emerged from. A swamp of bitterness, feeling left behind, unlistened to, not sharing in the bonanza that the neoliberal elite enjoy and continue to promote.
And Labour had the same reaction here that they had over the United States. They felt left behind.
Yes, exactly so. And that's why in the industrial areas, or rather post-industrial areas of Britain, the votes for Brexit were enormous. In some cases 67, 68%.
Donald
Trump benefited from the same thing.
Donald Trump has a base. It might be 35% of members a base. Who is Mrs. May's base?
Her personally, she now has no base. She's a dead woman walking. She's staying in power only because the alternative is potentially worse in the form of Boris Johnson. Resign? But the Tories have a base.
Yeah. Why doesn't she resign if that's the case?
She's a loyal Conservative.
Why don't the Tories ask her to resign?
But she's also a dishonourable lady. Let's face it, George. She is a cold, a callous, and a cruel woman.
Of course,
absolutely.
That's a synonym.
Absolutely.
She's a loyal Conservative and a cold, callous woman. That's what loyal Conservatives are.
These people for years have presided over a grotesque and obscene removal of rights, of wealth, of income from ordinary people. We're in this city here. The largest number of billionaires in the world live in this city. And tonight we've got 800 families being removed from Camden and taken out of their houses because their houses are unsafe. Ed, it is an absolute catastrophe. And this is what these people are presiding over.
That's a social breakdown.
Well, because they are able to fool enough people whose real interests don't lie with them, that the alternative, socialism, is worse. You know, they do. They undoubtedly do. There is a hard core of working people and lower middle class people who would benefit massively from Jeremy Corbyn's programme, but who are stampeded by one means or another on race, on xenophobia, on quote-unquote terrorism and all the others issues that we've talked about, to vote against their own interests. And then, of course, there is an elite. The elite is not 1%, despite what was said in your country in the Great Movement. The elite's much bigger than 1%. It's more like 20 or 25%.
I want each of you to take the last minute here and tell us where we're going to be a year from now with Brexit.
Well, I think, and hopefully George would endorse this as well, that those people that George talked about, because he's absolutely right, there is a hard core of the well-off and the selfish. You know, sometimes you say when you're working class and you're voting Tory, you check your wallet, and if you've got money in it, then maybe you've got a reason to vote Tory. If there's no money in it, it's because you're stupid. That's the reality. But you know what? Corbyn now is much more credible than he's ever been. And the people that George talked about that have been for years swayed by the poison in the press, they might just be reachable now, because Jeremy has went underneath the surface, a subterranean movement. He's ignored the media, he's ignored the biased press, and he's went to speak to the people.
It's a populist thing, and it's unique now in the world. It's left-wing populism, not the right-wing populism of Le Pen in France or Trump in the United States. Left-wing populism.
Hallelujah to that.
And we've been waiting for this for a very, very long time.
George Galloway, Tommy Sheridan, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much.